Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to director Adrian Chiarella. And the stars of the film, Joe Bird and Stacy Clausen. First of all, congratulations to the three of you, and thank you for being here with us in the city of New York. It's really an honor to premiere your film with this audience of local cinephiles. I think this is a cinephilic film in many ways, and it's we've come to the right place, I think.
Thank you.
In this festival, I really like to kind of start with origin stories. Adrian, you have done extensive work in episodic directing, short form filmmaking, and I'm curious if you could just tell us a little bit about the path to making this film and what about this film's subject matter specifically you felt needed to be the makings of your first feature.
Yeah. I think there are some projects where you can point to a really specific event or maybe something someone said or something you read that you go, oh, that was the day that I found the idea for this movie. But this kind of grew a little more organically than that. It was an idea I'd had for a long time. I knew that I had I guess just a kind of fondness for horror movies. I knew so many other filmmakers who were real experts in the genre, and I never wanted to compete with them on that. And at the same time, I really wanted to make a film about the experience of growing up as a young gay man in Australia. And I knew that horror movies were about fear. The more I explored them and the more I understood what they were, whether they're slasher films or they're supernatural horror movies or they're something a little bit more subtle than that, they're always about fear. And I thought, well, homophobia is a type of fear. There's a clue in the word. And I thought, why not explore that through a horror movie? Explore all the facets of it, the internalized, the externalized, all of that. And I remember I did read about exorcisms performed on LGBT teenagers, and I thought for a little while, maybe I'll do something that's like a gay version of The Exorcist. That sounds really cool. But then it just became really exploitative and really kind of, it really only seemed to reaffirm all the thinking behind those practices in terms of there being this demon that caused queerness. And so I got rid of that idea and just eventually kept writing and came up with this idea of a monster that takes the form of the person you most desire. And when I realized how powerful that could be, I was able to focus on the other part of the story that I was interested in, which was the love story between the two lead characters.
I'm happy you spoke about the horror genre being about fear, because I think fear in this film, as you say, takes many forms. It's wielded as a weapon. It's wielded as kind of a disciplinary tool to try to punish non-normative desire, and it's almost the horror elements of the film, I think, almost sneak up on you because the story is so just inherently about a type of terror that is commonplace. It's not. We don't find it in monsters, and so I'm curious if you could speak just a little bit about how you were thinking about genre as you were writing the script and developing the story, and what. How do you see this film as sort of fitting into the lineage that you mentioned in your introduction at MoMA last night?
Yeah, it's funny. I think that horror films, there's this kind of secret history with horror films, isn't there? That we've had great artists like Mary Shelley and James Whale and Murnau and Clive Barker and these queer artists that have really shaped horror into what it is now. Sometimes because they were operating in a taboo field when they were dealing with themes that they wanted to address, sometimes not, but I think you can't deny that, and I think what we did with this film was try to reclaim a little bit of that space back by making a queer horror movie. That was really important to me. I think horror films are also just really fun because they're very visceral. They get to you through your body. It's a bit like when you do comedy, you can sneak a message in by making people laugh. I think there's something similar that happens in horror movies, and they're very universal. Fear is such a universal feeling, and I think that translates to a lot of different cultures around the world. So I knew that was very powerful as well.
I think one of the things that's so effective about the film is that Joe and Stacy's performances have such a sort of authenticity to them and a real I believe that we're in the presence of two teen boys who are figuring themselves out and navigating a very challenging situation. And I'm curious, Joe and Stacy, what your relationship to the genre is, and whether it was the sort of the horror angle that drew you to the roles, or maybe that was new for you.
Yeah, I think the great thing about horror and like kind of the genre is that you can really heighten situations to kind of more so like prove a point. And in case of this film here, it's kind of like this conversion ritual therapy is a metaphor for homophobia, and it shows how because in simple life someone might make a what is like an insult disguised as a joke, like a homophobic remark, and will be played off as a joke, and everyone's like, oh, they're fine, whatever. But then no one sees that it can really affect individuals and stuff like that. So I think with horror you can really just heighten it and then confront the audience so they can hopefully have that fear produced in them, and hopefully have some empathy. And I think this what's good about horror is you can kind of comment on social and political things kind of in like a disguised lens almost, so that way hopefully the message can come through in an entertaining way, but also so you can connect to it. And I think that's what's great about horror. And I know Stacey has just wrapped another horror film, so go on.
Well, I mean, in terms of watching horror, my relationship with horror isn't that great. I do get scared quite easily when it comes to that sort of thing, but I do love filming them. There's so many things in horror that you don't get to do. There's a fantastical aspect to them that it brings the spectacle to an emotional story. But yeah, that's what I think was so fantastic about Leviticus and this script was while we were filming it, it really felt like we were coming at it from the angle of what it was really about. We had those scary big stunts and horror elements, but while we were filming it never truly felt like a horror. Everything felt layered and considerate while we were doing it, and it was all done for a meaningful purpose.
I am really impressed by the way in which you sort of embedded a coming of age film within a horror film. It's it's really the warmth of the characters and the specificity of the characters, I think, that ties the whole experience together, especially the chemistry between your characters that you were able to really, I think, sensitively get at via your shared performances. And I'm curious if all three of you could speak, both from the actor's perspective and from the director's perspective, about developing chemistry between characters, but also between performances, if that makes sense, and how that worked.
Yeah, I guess it started in, well, I was going to say it started in rehearsal. It started in casting, didn't it? Where we sort of, I don't really like to do callback auditions where someone just comes in and performs a scene and then you sort of shuffle them out the door. I like to get a few actors together and do some workshops and see what everyone has to bring to the table. And I knew that Joe and Stacy, we did some sessions where you guys just, what did we do? We did a couple of scenes that weren't even in the film, I think, and a few bits of improv. Yeah, and then, obviously out of that, it became very clear that these were the two actors that we wanted in our film. But I think on the first day of rehearsal, we went for a road trip, and I sent you guys out on little adventures to go and find each other in different parts of town.
And it was raining as well.
And it was raining, yes. Yeah, just don't make me sound too mean, but yeah. And then I got you to stay in character and go into
Yeah, we went to the shopping mall in character, and
we bought each other gifts.
Yes, we did an escape room together. He was horrible at it, by the way. But
yeah.
No, I'm joking.
I was screaming like a baby, man. It was insane. No good.
You got trapped in a room at one point. It was this whole chaotic thing. But if anything, it brought us closer together. And I think we went op shopping together, and we just got to know each other. And I think what's so great about Stacy is that he was so open to allowing me to get to know him, so we can have that connection. And we just had a great support around us as well that just allowed us to bring our kind of best performance because just of all the support we had.
Yeah, and I can only say the same about Joe. He's someone who makes it incredibly easy to get to know him and just open his heart to you. I've said, he's really hard on his sleeve type of guy, and that's really important when you're working on a film that hinges so much on the chemistry between the two characters, to have someone who just allows you to know them and then in turn trust them. And it's that trust that I think really translates on screen, especially when you're dealing with the intimacy as well. And Adrian's mentioned how there's not a whole lot of dialogue in the film. Everything is kind of conveyed through the eyes and the true connection between Ryan and Naeem. And I think it was really important for me and Joe to get along. And he made it super easy.
And I think it sort of transferred, like it went all the way through production. I think what you were talking about before of weaving this coming of age story in with a traditional horror movie, we had set pieces that were like complicated horror sequences where we had to, storyboard everything within an inch of its life and do very complicated stunt rehearsal and camera rehearsal and things like that. But then there were days where, because I knew this heart of the film was between the two main characters, there were days where we did the complete opposite of that sort of process, and I told the camera operator to just follow the guys around and just let them improvise and don't worry about any of that stuff and just let things go a little bit loose. So I think that combination was, there and it was in the process as well.
It's interesting you mentioned trust, because I see it as sort of a film about learning to trust, or learning how trust works when you can't trust the world around you necessarily. And a part of what I think is so striking about these sort of threads of the film thematically is that the physicality of the horror sequences sort of illustrates this idea of like when you're wrestling with an invisible entity, invisible to the people around you. What does that look like and what does that feel like? And I wonder if you could just talk a bit about that, because I think visually that's such a striking element of the film, is these sequences of just wrestling with an invisible monster.
Yeah. Oh no, you guys talk about it. You did it. So yeah.
Yeah, I had quite a lot of it. And it's a strange thing, when you're I remember in the kissing booth when not the kissing booth, the photo booth in which there is kissing. The photos drop out and you kind of see me there, like with my hands up. And I remember shooting it in pre-production, and it's literally, he's just like, put your hand like a little bit more this way, I remember there was one of the production designers was just sat below holding like a piece of Perspex up, and I just had to just,
it was like a little stick, like a ruler.
Yeah. It was so wild. But then again, when it came to like more conversation thing, I remember we had Joe just stand in a rehearsal. So I had that reference point. So when we shot, I kind of knew what I was supposed to be saying, and that made it a lot easier as well, I think.
Yeah, and sorry, could you just remember what the question was again, just real quick?
I'm just curious about the sort of the wrestling with an invisible opponent.
Well, I mean, it's like, I think, it's like really. Oh, look, my character didn't have so much in terms of like, because I think, when in the photo booth, as I see Stacy at the house with like this invisible person, it's like, we called it Detective Name, didn't we? From like he's trying to figure out what's going on, and but that all couldn't. I wouldn't have been able to do that if Stacy wasn't so good at doing that with no one, because that's a hard thing to do, and you aced it, bro. That's all I'm gonna say. Of course.
And Stacy, I know we rehearsed a lot about this sort of dual role that you were playing of Ryan and then this entity, this monster, and we sort of figured out a way that this entity would walk and move, and we sort of talked about different animals and all of that sort of stuff that you do in rehearsal. So the idea of the physicality was quite important in creating that distinction, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, and we also I had a session with the intimacy coordinator, like me, Stacy, Chiarella at the start of the film, and it was Shannon there. It was just the people that all interact with the monster, just so we can all get on the same page of how that felt and like how it feels and what it kind of like entails almost, which is very helpful.
Adrian, I want to ask you a little bit about the setting, because I think the setting is like a character in the story is something that we say a lot, but in this case, it's it almost feels like a defining, like it defines the entire mood within which events unfold, and it's sort of if not a character, it's a presence that's very potent. That it feels very specific to this town in Victoria where the events take place. I'm curious if you could just speak about selecting this location and how you went about kind of giving it a life of its own.
Yeah, we wanted to create a space that felt like it had seen better times, that it once boomed, and that a lot of the people had moved away, but somehow the ideas, the very old, ancient ideas they'd brought with them had stayed on this bit of land. And we didn't actually find a specific town that fit the very, very specific and very discerning vision that the production designer and I had. So we sort of picked a few locations on the outskirts of Melbourne and in other parts of the state of Victoria and drew lots of maps and sort of gave like a very specific feeling to this made-up place that we created, because I think it was, ironically, the only way to get a kind of consistency of look is to not go to one town. It's actually to kind of find that look in all the different spaces that you need and bring them together. And what we were really going for in that aesthetic, we talked a lot about converging the sort of nature with human-made elements. That's why there's sort of these sort of burnt-out sort of boneyards of factories in the landscape that are kind of being taken over by nature. And that idea even extended to the church that they were in, which is a real church on the outskirts of Melbourne. That's, you know, we wanted to avoid the sort of stained glass window vibe. We wanted somewhere with that grey brick look, so it almost just blended with the factory world that the boys were playing in. And we did that because we just had this idea of wanting to make the audience question through the aesthetic of what out of these ancient edicts is actually from the universe and what stuff that we've actually imposed on each other as people. So yeah, that was really important to us.
Was Joe and Stacy, were you, was this a part of the country that you were familiar with? Was this an environment that is,
Yeah, well, and so I'm from a place in Australia called Adelaide, which is about an hour flight into Melbourne where we were filming, but you know, Adelaide's quite a like small kind of place, and it kind of is like a similar vibe to the setting of where this film takes place. So I definitely felt like I had like a familiar setting around me while we were filming this, which, you know, definitely helped add to the vibe probably. And then
Yeah. I mean, I'm from Melbourne, which is a slightly bigger city in Australia, but where we were shooting some of these places in our regional Victoria was a place called Geelong, which I was very familiar with. I kind of went through there in my summers when I was a kid, so I was quite familiar with the area for sure. But yeah, in terms of its relation to story, when you're telling a story about identity and these two boys who are quite lost and feel alone, to have this small town that feels so claustrophobic and, you know, is a visual representation of isolation, which is a big part of the film, and how these two boys are kind of in this little bubble of their own. I think that it plays into the film beautifully.
I think drawing a story like this to a satisfying conclusion is a tricky proposition, and I'm curious, Adrian, if you from the jump, if you sort of wanted the resolution to be positive, of kind of one of escape, of getting out of this sort of claustrophobic setting, or if that was something that came in the process of putting the story together.
Yeah, as I was writing it and working on the multiple drafts that we did, I knew the feeling that I was going for. Like, I knew that I wanted some sense of reconnecting between these two. From a love story point of view, in terms of the coming-of-age love story version of the film, I knew that I wanted that feeling you often get in those types of films when they feel satisfying, that somehow the two main characters reconnect at some point. And then from a horror movie point of view, I knew that I wanted that idea of the final frame where you realize, oh, maybe the monster didn't really die. And I knew the converging of those two things felt right for what we were saying about the scars of this kind of trauma on whether you've been through something very structured like conversion therapy, or you've just suffered a lot of homophobic microaggressions growing up. I knew that was something that these characters would stay with these characters. So yeah.
I think we're almost out of time, but I want to ask how you see yourself as sort of participating in Australian film culture, because I think there's an Australian cinematic sensibility, perhaps, that is always interesting to encounter in films from your national industry context. I'm curious if you could just speak a bit about, we talked about the horror lineage. What about the Australian cinematic lineage that you're participating in?
Yeah, I mean, it's an incredible lineage. I mean, it's funny because I think people expect certain things from Australian films, but I mean, I do feel like the horror element is kind of relevant. I think it's probably the only genre we have such a strong tradition in, and it means that as soon as the film starts and you get a jump scare, you hear Australian accents, you're like, oh, this is a very specific type of genre, and then the audience knows exactly where they are and they can orientate themselves. And I think that was a really exciting, an exciting sort of form to tackle, and then go, okay, now we're going to do our own thing with it within the first few minutes of the film. So yeah.
Well, it's just specifically Australian enough, and yet also, I think, a universal accessibility to this story. So that's all the time we have, unfortunately, but thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Thanks so
joining.
much, guys.
Thank you.
For coming out.